Jūs. Kā pirmo vēlos pieteikt video prezentācijā kungu no Eiropas PPP ekspertīzes centra Diarmaid Kehoe par PPP tendencēm Eiropā. Grumiņas kundzei patiešām bija taisnība, ka šodien ir piesaistīti labākie no labākajiem kompetenti speciālisti, tāpēc ļaujiet man nedaudz ieskatīties Kehoe kunga CV un pastāstīt jums, kāpēc šis kungs patiešām ir dzirdēšanas vērts. Kehoe kungs strādā Eiropas PPP ekspertīzes centrā, kas ir daļa no Eiropas investīciju bankas. Šis centrs tika izveidots jau tālajā 2008. gadā, lai palīdzētu publiskajam sektoram nodrošināt labāku PPP instrumentu izmantošanu Eiropas līmenī. Tas sadarbojās ar ministrijām un valsts iestādēm, divpusējo projektu un politikas uzdevumu veikšanā, gan dažādās publiskās sektora jomās, ieskaitot sociālo infrastruktūru un tā tālāk. Pats Kehoe kungs ir inženieris ar pieredzi gan privātajā, gan publiskajā sektorā, pieredzējis visus projekta cikla posmus no uzsākšanas līdz pat noslēgumam, pārzina projektu finansēšanu, projektu vadību un sarežģītus publisko iepirkumu procesus. Nākamā prezentācija būs angļu valodā, taču neuztraucieties, prezentācijas beigās centīšos pāris tēzēs to visu apkopot un savilkt kopā arī latviešu valodā. Dāmas un kungi, jūsu uzmanībai Diarmaid Kehoe.
Okay, I'll get started. Hello everyone, greetings from Luxembourg. My name is Diarmaid Kehoe. I'm working with the European Investment Bank and more particularly the European PPP Expertise Centre. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you today. I wanted to briefly start by introducing EPEC, who we are and what we do, and then to get into some of the details at a project level about what are PPPs, why use them, and some of the key benefits and challenges around using PPPs. After that, I wanted to talk briefly about the European PPP market itself, and then some of the regional characteristics within Central and Eastern Europe that may be more relevant in a Latvian context. And then I wanted to just finish up by talking to you about what I think are some relevant project examples in a Latvian context. Just to quickly kick off and give you an introduction to EPEC and what we do. We were established in 2008, and our goal, our objective is to help the public sector to deliver better PPPs in Europe. We work with only public sector organizations that are working on PPPs at a policy level or at a project delivery level. So that involves ministries of finance and PPP units from across Europe, but also delivery agencies delivering roads projects, airports, schools, social infrastructure of many kinds. We were set up by the European Investment Bank, the European member states and candidate countries, and the European Commission itself. We're a small team and we're multidisciplinary in nature. So we have economists, engineers, lawyers, and project finance specialists from across Europe within the team. An important point about us just before moving on is that we are PPP neutral. While we assist countries on developing PPP projects, we are not promoters of PPP. We just want to assist. If countries decide to pursue them, we want to assist in making sure that they are a success. Just very briefly, there are three areas of assistance that we provide on PPP projects themselves, on PPP policy development. So that's working with governments that are looking to create PPP law, to develop and adopt PPP policies within their own countries. Also, then we share good practice from across the 40 different entities that we work with. So there are public sector teams all across Europe that have been through the same struggles that are being experienced in Latvia, for example, in delivering this new form of project and in making a success of it. And the idea with EPEC is that we bring together all of those lessons that are being learned from similar teams all across Europe so that we can all benefit from the hard lessons learned in the past. So at a very high level, what are PPPs and how do they work? I think it's useful that we have a simple definition at the outset, something to ensure that we are all talking about the same thing. So I know that within the room, there may be people that have plenty of experience on these kinds of projects, and there may be others that are considering undertaking this kind of project for the first time. So just in terms of a general definition, we talk about the public and private sectors working together to deliver public services and infrastructure projects. So it's not just about the projects itself, but also about the accompanying services that may be delivered over perhaps a 25-year period. It is a long-term contract focused on services and with a significant risk transfer between the public sector and the private sector at a more significant level than would be expected on a more traditional project, which generally just involves construction by the private sector and then the public sector would take it on. in a PPP, there's a whole life focus over the full duration of, for example, a 25-year contract. And again, on PPPs, there's a focus around delivering value for money in comparison with potential traditional options. Just to dig in a little further again, and to help in gaining familiarity with the PPP model itself, there are some features of the PPP project which are unique. You are not just paying for an asset only, you're also paying for a service. There could be a whole range of different services incorporated in to a PPP for which the private sector retains the risk around delivery of these services over the full duration of the contract. We talk about a specification of project outputs rather than inputs, unlike in a traditional project where there may be the public authority undertaking the full design of the project and the private sector only coming in to construct the asset. On a PPP, the project is defined in terms of outputs. What is the required output? What is the desired outcome rather than how to get there? And this creates an opportunity for innovation within the PPP. As mentioned already, there's a focus on whole life cycle cost. It's in the interests of the PPP company to design an asset that will operate efficiently over its full life, operational life as well as construction life, so that it operates effectively for the benefit of the public sector. Many risks associated with that are transferred across to the private sector. And one of the things that PPP contracts create is a tension within the contract itself throughout the construction and the operational phase, so that at no point over the full operational phase of that project will there be a reduction in the quality or the quantity of the output being delivered by the PPP Co. It's an important difference between traditional projects and PPP projects. And then finally, just another unique aspect is that there's the whole issue around private finance. You have project finance coming in, so private sector lenders coming in to invest in the public sector asset. And this creates a very different dynamic, which we can come to in a moment. Just at a very high level again, and not to dwell into too much detail because it will be discussed separately, but we talk about two main standard PPP models: user pay and government pay. These are also known as maybe tolled projects and availability projects. On the user pay structure, this is generally used for what we talk about as economic infrastructure. So for roads projects, ports, airports, etc. And this is where, as it says, the user generally pays for the asset. So through the charges passed down to a user, the cost of the asset is repaid and the cost of the services is repaid to the private sector participant. On the government pay type projects, we talk about these being availability type projects. These are generally used for social infrastructure projects, so those such as schools, hospitals, courthouses, prisons, etc. And these projects are based around a monthly or quarterly payment by the public sector to the PPP company for the delivery of the asset and for the delivery of the service itself. In both models, the PPP contract is set up so that there are deductions from the payments to the PPP company if at any point there is a reduction in performance or there is a reduction in the quality of the asset. The important point is that on a PPP, the asset requirements and the service requirements in year 20 are the same as they are in year 1, and the risk around the delivery of those obligations sits with the private sector on a PPP. Just quickly as well, there are some myths around PPPs, and it's worth clarifying about these. What PPPs are not. They are not free. That while they have a very different payment profile from a traditional project, there is a completely different on the user charge based projects. Yes, the cost is passed down to the citizen, but that is a real cost that does need to be understood by the procuring authority. On the government pay projects, while there is not an upfront payment, generally speaking, at the completion of construction, the payments are scheduled out over perhaps a 25-year period, with a portion of it being debt repayment and a portion of it being services payment. This is a real payment, though, that really needs to be considered in terms of long-term affordability for the public sector. It's not something that should be entered into lightly. PPP also is not just a financing tool. It's not just about bringing in private sector investment into the country. It's about DBFM, design, build, finance, and maintain, and bring all of these different aspects together in order to deliver better public services, better public assets. And it's important that the public authorities appreciate that. With PPP projects, it is possible to achieve off-balance sheet treatment. In accordance with the Eurostat rules, it would not necessarily impact on national debt figures. And while this is an attractive aspect of PPPs, it should not be the most important or the key driving factor. The key driving factor should be exploring a new delivery option in order to deliver better public services and better public assets at the end of the day. I know that in the context of the EU renegotiation of the multi-annual financial framework, that many countries across Europe are going to be experiencing reduced levels of EU grants coming into their countries, and many are exploring now the opportunities that PPP may offer in order to continue to push ahead with their investment plans. And that is true. PPP certainly can play a role there, but it should not be the only reason that public authorities decide to move ahead with a PPP project. Again, they are complex as well, and they are not simple and not as simple as the traditional project form, and that needs to be recognized and appreciated from the outset. And this means taking on, additional advisory services and seeking additional help. They're not deals; they're not a one-time thing. They're something that is about a long-term commitment to service over a 25-year period. It's a 25-year decision rather than simply a case of getting to the deal at financial close and forgetting about the project. But why use PPPs to deliver infrastructure, and what are the challenges? So there are many benefits to PPPs. Now, I won't go through all of these, but to just maybe tie together a few of them. It does allow the public sector to focus on public services. So we find all across Europe that, and especially there's plenty of examples on the social infrastructure side where, you have school teachers that are concerned about building asset maintenance, about leaks in roofs, about cold buildings, etc. You have hospital managers, doctors, and nurses concerned about the poor quality of the assets within which they work. What a PPP does is it removes that. It allows teachers to focus on teaching, doctors and nurses and health care managers to focus on management of healthcare, of delivering healthcare services. And the PPP company comes in to take care of the asset, to take all responsibility around that, to ensure that it is not an issue for those trying to deliver the public service. It also results in better integration of design, construction, and operational phase services. This is something, like I said, a PPP is not just about private finance, it's DBFM. It's bringing all of these different aspects together. And this kind of integration leads to innovation in many instances, as design teams are working with operations teams very closely so they can ensure that a building is being developed and delivered so that in 15 years' time, in 20 years' time, it will deliver the same standard of service and the same standard of asset as it did on day one. The dynamic is totally different in a PPP contract compared to a traditional contract. You have a situation where the whole life cycle obligations drives completely different behaviors within a PPP bidder than it does in a traditional bidder. They are not interested in doing the lowest possible cost asset in order to deliver on the minimum requirements set out by the public authority. They want to deliver an asset that they are confident will continue to deliver over a 20-25-year period, because it will be at their risk if it doesn't. So it creates this pay now to save later dynamic within the private bidders, which is very healthy and results in better assets for the public sector. It also allows, earlier implementation of infrastructure plans. PPP, by mobilizing private capital, it does mean that, assets that you would only have the finances to support in a number of years can be brought forward in order to deliver them this year. It's a crucial aspect of it that does, like I said, facilitate accelerated public infrastructure delivery earlier than expected. And it brings oversight as well. By bringing in third parties that are going to be financing the assets themselves, they are, like they say, they have skin in the game, as we say. They have a risk on their own heads for which they are very concerned. They will only enter into it if they are confident that they can deliver on these assets. There are also challenges, and some of the common challenges I just want to go through here. That everyone needs to have their eyes open to what these issues are and to work in order to ensure that they are overcome. From an organizational and structural perspective, obviously at a state level, there's the legal and institutional framework that needs to be set up. Organizations need to be created and designed in such a way that decision making can be done efficiently, quickly, and in a fair manner that doesn't result in delays to the process. There can be additional interest from public sector stakeholders as well on PPP projects. It's a new way of doing things, and sometimes there's a perception that it's a privatization of public assets, which it is not. It's working with the private sector to deliver public assets. But it's important that on the public side, we're in a position to communicate clearly, openly, and honestly with the public to explain the benefits, to explain the analysis that is being undertaken in order to ensure that the PPP is delivered to a good standard and represents good value for money for the public sector. In terms of capacity and capability, both on the public side and on the private side, there's an issue around that, especially in newer markets where there is not a PPP industry developed in many countries across Europe. And it's a case of gradually building up that experience within the public sector. It's essential that good external advisors are taken on that can bring PPP experience from across Europe. And on the private side as well, it's important that the public sector creates conditions so that the private sector will commit to delivering PPPs in a certain market. If there's clarity for the private sector about the kinds of projects that are going to be developed over the medium to long term within a certain country, then they will commit resources, time, and investment to that country. And this results in a better market overall. And a better market means better value for money for the public sector because it has increased competition. It's absolutely essential in delivering, like I said, value for money. Just in terms of funding and financing, we've already spoken about affordability, and that public sector clients need to have their eyes open about the long-term obligations that they're committing to with a PPP project. There can be payments over a 25-year period, and that needs to be thought about in terms of the long-term budgeting in the public sector. On the private side, there's the issue around bankability. Will they be able to attract private finance to actually finance the delivery of these projects themselves? If there are too many risks transferred onto the private side, and especially risks cannot control, or if they are risks which the public sector would be better off controlling, then there can be an issue around the financing, and banks may pull back if they feel that they are having risks pushed upon them which they cannot fully control. And just finally, again, about operational contracts. A PPP isn't over on the day that financial close is reached. It's over when the contract expires after 25 years. And it's important that the public side appreciates that while they won't have a heavy hand in the running of the asset, they do need to continue to monitor it and its performance and availability over the longer period. I just wanted to briefly talk then about, we've talked about what PPPs are, why to use them, what the key benefits are around using PPPs. But I wanted to talk to you then about PPP data itself in the European Union, and then focus in on Central and Eastern Europe. In the EPEC team, we gather together market information from across Europe on an ongoing basis. We have over 1,800 PPP projects in a database, and we gather information around them, their costs, their performance, etc., on an ongoing basis. This is what the European market looks like in general, and this is by project number. So you'll see that there are three large sectors: transport, education, and health, that dominate. There are other areas then, like environment. So you might see waste to energy projects in environment, public order and safety. Like I said, you get courthouses, prisons. But what we see in Europe, and what we've seen all across Europe, is that the early PPP markets generally deliver large transport assets as their first PPP projects. These are key strategic infrastructure assets that are absolutely vital to the economic welfare of a country. Generally speaking, as PPP markets mature, we see a situation where there's a growing number of social infrastructure assets coming into the market. So as we see now, when we look at Central and Eastern Europe, What we see is, again, as expected, by project number, there's a dominance of transport projects. And slowly over time, we would expect to see education, healthcare, also environment, gradually growing and gradually taking on a bigger and a bigger part of the overall PPP market by project number. If we look at this what I've presented here is the number of PPP projects by sector in Central and Eastern Europe. When we look at it by value, you can see the total dominance of transport as in terms of investment size in that market itself. And as we move down to see the different types of PPPs, again, there's 43% are government pay, so these might be toll roads, ports, airports, etc. And then 47% is user pay, so this would be more social infrastructure type projects. Over time, we would expect to see the government pay type projects increase significantly here. Once those large strategic infrastructure assets in the transport side are constructed, then you tend to have an increase in the social infrastructure type projects. Just looking at, again, the PPP market activity over time in Eastern Europe, it's completely irregular. There's very little can be said about predicting flows and increases or decreases. There was an increase in advance of the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, especially in terms of project value rather than project number, which shows, again, that points to this large transport assets being constructed. But again, we will see, and we would expect to see, a significant drop-off this year because of COVID and because of the inability of public sector organizations all across Europe to actually deliver on public procurements. I just wanted to finish up then. We talked about the general market and the way the general market has gone, and the fact that we can see across Central Europe that it's quite typical of newer PPP markets rather than some of the most mature markets like the UK and France, where they started on roads projects 30 years ago, that you can see that the wave of PPP experience has moved across Europe, and that there's going to be, we would expect, a gradual uptake of social infrastructure projects in Central and Eastern Europe over the coming years. So in these examples, I just wanted to show a few interesting examples from the neighborhood countries around you that may be of interest in a Latvian context. The first project I wanted to show you was the Espoo Schools project. This has just recently reached financial close in summer of this year. It was undertaken by a municipal authority rather than a national authority. And it's the first social infrastructure PPP in Finland. So while Finland had good experience on roads projects, undertaking a series of what they call the E18 roads PPPs, now for the first time they've moved into constructing schools and daycare centers. So as part of this one project, they engaged in what we call bundling, bringing together of assets. So they have 5 schools and 3 daycare centers as part of this one project. What that does is it increases the value of the project, increases the profile of the project across the European market, and will mean that there is greater interest, greater engagement from the wider European PPP market in actually participating in this, and that will drive down costs and improve value for money for the public authority. Another example from the general region is Austria, the Vienna Schools campus. And why is this interesting? Well, this is interesting because Vienna committed to a PPP program for education projects. This means that they've committed over a 5 to 10 year period in undertaking a whole range of schools PPP projects. So they've given a signal to the market, to operate in Austria, to come, and there will be more work coming down the line. So it's worth your while investing here, committing to participating here, understanding our market, and playing here in the long term. And again, that increases competition, which is better for value for money on the public side. What this project involved, it was a kindergarten, an elementary school, and a middle school altogether. And another quick example from Austria is just included this one because it's on the healthcare side. This is the Vienna Radiation Oncology PPP. So again, it involved technology, but it also included a refurbishment element. So they were talking about dealing with existing buildings as well as constructing 2 new buildings and providing technologies. So again, an example of, not just education, but into healthcare as well. And then the final example I wanted to give you was from Slovenia, and it's the Care Homes PPP. And this is brand new as well. They have just reached preferred bidder stage this summer on the project. It's residential elderly care, so for the older population, and also then there is a daycare center element as well within it. And again, just to point out that this was undertaken at a municipal level rather than a national level. So that's it. I mean, I just wanted to provide a summary of different project examples that I thought might be relevant in a Latvian context. I mean, I think just the key messages to go over again, I think that PPP is a proven model now. When done correctly, with the right skills, understanding, and organizational abilities. It is a proven model for delivering infrastructure assets across Europe. There are benefits from a balance sheet perspective in terms of putting assets off the national government balance sheet, but again, that should not be the only reason that these projects are pursued. While they are not simple, they are complex efforts. There is plenty of assistance available out there. There's good advisory capacity from all across Europe to assist. There is also EPEC are also here to assist on the development of projects and providing some good guidance as well, and sharing the lessons that have been learned all across Europe by similar public authorities that have considered and have learned lessons around undertaking PPP projects. So that's all from me. Best of luck today with the rest of the conference, and I'll hope to speak to you soon.